How did Natalie, a listener to this podcast, save $3,000 while still in high school? How did she then graduate from college debt-free? And how did she then pay cash for a car and buy a home in less than 2 years after graduating from college? We'll answer these questions and more on this, the 87th episode of the DoughRoller Podcast.
Welcome to the DoughRoller Podcast, where the best thing money can buy is financial freedom. We help you make more, spend less, and invest the rest. And now your host, Rob Berger.
Whether you're just starting out, buried under a mountain of debt, or well on your way to financial freedom, this is the podcast to help you take your finances to the next level. Hey, everybody, this podcast is sponsored by Betterment, the most preferred automated investing service. Betterment has cutting-edge technology to optimize returns, minimize taxes, and save you time and money. Join over 34,000 customers who have already streamlined their portfolio management at betterment.com/roller. That's betterment.com/ROLLER. So today we have on the show Natalie. Natalie is a listener to this podcast. As you may have already listened to podcast 77, we had Kate and Trevor on, which was my first time to have a listener on the show, and I thought it would be a great opportunity just to hear about other people's stories. So far, we've kind of had this will be the second one, and sort of two success stories in a row, if you will. But I'm open to hearing from folks on all different kinds of issues. Maybe folks that just have questions they want to talk through, and they're willing to do it on the show where others can benefit. But today, Natalie, definitely a success story. And I think you'll learn a lot. It's a very interesting story in that, as you'll hear, she had a great sense about personal finance and money management from a very, very young age. One of the reasons I thought her story was so important, and not to give her story away, you'll hear it in just a second, but it's this. When it relates to college and the cost of college, of course, there's I think over $1 trillion right now in outstanding school loans, and the cost of college has, as we know, gone up and up and up, well above the rate of inflation. And there are, a lot of reasons for that, but the fact is, it is expensive. But what you often hear when you're on, searching, when you're on the internet, you hear news stories, reading the paper. When they want to talk about the cost of education, so often the story you hear is the person who got a degree, often a liberal arts degree, and I'm not being critical of that, I have an English degree, but a degree where, at least in this day and age, it can be challenging to get a job, let's be honest. But often with a liberal arts degree, and they have $100,000, $150,000, or $200,000 in school loans, and they don't know what they're going to do. They're just at a complete loss. And I get frustrated in that it doesn't seem to me like it's very balanced. What about the story of someone who works really hard, doesn't spend a lot of money, saves as much money as they can, and they graduate from college debt-free? Well, I don't know. Maybe that story's just too boring. Well, I don't think so. And that is the story we are going to hear today from Natalie. Natalie, welcome to the show.
Hey, great to be here, Rob. Thank you.
I am so thankful for your willingness to take time out of your day and to talk with us. You've shared with me through email a bit of your story as it relates to personal finance and investing, and I know that folks will learn a lot from sort of your experiences. So why don't we just start off, Natalie, and kind of give folks an idea of who you are?
Yeah, sure thing. So I'm 24 years old. I currently live in the Washington metropolitan area. I'm originally from New York City, but I came down to D.C. rather, by way of university study. So I did 4 years of undergraduate study in D.C. and decided to stick around when I graduated a couple of years back. I currently work in the finance industry in the D.C. area, but do quite a bit of travel for my work. And I think I have an interesting story to share with your viewers, so I hope that they enjoy it.
Yeah, I think you do too. Curious, do you enjoy the travel you do?
I do. I love the travel. I get an opportunity to meet with a lot of really great clients in the financial services industry. And not to mention, I get meal per diems when I go on the road, so that's not a bad deal.
Do you save some of those per diems?
Secretly, I do, but I'd never tell my colleagues that.
Well, given what I know of your story, that answer doesn't surprise me. So for those listening, just a little bit of background, like other folks that I've interviewed, listeners, Natalie and I kind of met via email. She had sent me in a question and we just started conversing back and forth in email. And so through email, I have sort of a high-level understanding of her journey, particularly as it relates to personal finance and investing. So we're going to kind of walk through that. And Natalie, what I'd like to do is go all the way back to, I guess, before college when you're in high school, because what you've told me is that you worked during high school, right? You had a job.
That's correct.
What'd you do?
So I actually went to boarding school during high school, so most of the work that I did was in the summers. Even though I was away at school, they gave some students an opportunity to work in the cafeteria on the weekends. So I'd actually take my precious weekends and get up in the morning and help to serve the students that I went to school with, which was a little bit of a ding to the pride, but I was willing to do it to earn a little bit of money while I was away at school. And then during the summers, I was part of a program in New York City called Summer Youth Employment. And basically it's run by the state or New York City rather. And you go through and you apply and they set you up with an employer, and the city gives the employer a subsidy to employ low-income youth in the city, of which I was one. And I did a variety of jobs through that program for about 3 summers. I worked for the Parks Department one summer. I worked with pre-K children one summer as well. And then I also worked on a newsletter initiative for public health a different summer. So that's kind of the bulk of my work experience throughout high school.
And from that work, how much money were you able to save by the time you headed off to college?
I had roughly $3,000 in the bank when I headed to college, and that seemed like a large sum at the time. But as I was going through my studies, I realized it wasn't much to offset the cost of being a college student.
So here's what I'm trying to figure out. You're in terms of a college tuition, $3,000 isn't a lot of money. Although, in terms of what a high school student saves, it's phenomenal. I worked all through high school, but I got to tell you, I didn't save a nickel. I spent every dime I made. So here's what I'm trying to figure out. What motivated you? Because you had to make some sacrifices to save that kind of money. So what motivated you to do that?
I think that I'm just one of those people who's really wired to be a saver. I remember being 14 years old and going to Staples and getting a little personal ledger where I could write down everything I spent, everything I took in income, and everything that I had retained at the end of the month. And I was always so motivated by seeing that retained earnings number, if you will, growing from month to month. And that was what gave me more pleasure than eating out or spending money on other odds and ends. There were ways to have inexpensive outings in New York City because there's so much to do there. So I got a lot more pleasure from growing my savings base than from doing expensive activities on the weekends and during the summer during the week.
I like how you refer to it as retained earnings. Is it a fair guess you did not call it that when you were 14?
Most likely not. Most likely not.
Yeah, that comes from my days of evaluating financial statements. So you think you're just wired that way. I mean, you referenced the jobs you had, were some of them in New York City, you got them because you came from a low-income household.
Correct.
Do you think that somehow that experience motivated you to save, to kind of save the money because of that experience, growing up?
I think it was. I think that growing up in a low-income household, I was always motivated to break that cycle a little bit. I was definitely never in a position where I was wondering where my next meal came from, but I definitely lived in a paycheck-to-paycheck household, and recognizing that early on and seeing my mother go through the struggles of how to pay for this bill or that bill, I wanted to make sure that I was never in that position when I got older. So you're absolutely right, and that was a motive for me to really make sure that my personal financial house was in order. Yeah,
it's interesting to me because I kind of grew up in the same situation where, I didn't miss a meal, but it was very much paycheck to paycheck for a lot of my younger, years growing up through high school. But unlike you, at that point in my life, it didn't motivate me to save. That came later. But that's something that's just I'm trying to, as I talk to more people, deconstruct why some people like you go get a ledger at age 14 so you can track your retained earnings. And you save $3,000 and others don't. And, part of it may just be, some people are hardwired to do that. But I think all of us can learn it. So, okay, so you saved $3,000 in high school, You head down to D.C. For college. How did you pay for college?
So again, going back to being from a low-income household, I was eligible for a pretty substantial amount of scholarship money from the school, and they were very generous. Basically, the scholarship covered my tuition, but did not cover room and board. And quite frankly, I knew quite a few people at the school who were in the same situation, and you can really take advantage of being in that situation because you can get a lot of control over your non-tuition expenses. So I tried to manage that side as much as possible. So in the beginning, I was living in a dorm and I needed the loan money in order to cover the dorm costs and some of my food costs because I wasn't making very much money as a work-study student. But since the tuition was covered, that was a huge burden off my shoulder. But again, still needed to lean on the loans for some other expenses.
So you got student loans to pay for basically room and board?
That's correct, yeah.
And I'm just curious, and I actually had a listener email me the other day about student loans, and I'm going to try to do some more about it. But specifically, it was, when you were getting your student loans, did you just contact someone at the school's financial aid office to figure out what the best options were for you? How did you figure out what loans you could get, what the best options were?
So they actually serve it, or at least where I went to school, they served it up on a platter when I first got my acceptance notice. It was all part of the same package. So I knew the loan type, federal versus Perkins loan, or Stafford versus Perkins loan, rather, and the amounts for each. So they actually put it very clearly on the line items, how much each were going to be. What they don't tell you is the login information for you to be able to access it online. So it accrues somewhere off in space somewhere, and right. You can't really get a handle on what the full balance is until you do some investigative research yourself and sign up and get a login, username, and password to access that information.
And did you eventually track all that information down so that you could see how much you'd borrowed?
Not until after my sophomore year, actually.
Okay, that's interesting. So for the first 2 years, I assume you had some rough idea of how much you had borrowed, but you didn't know the exact amount.
That's correct, yeah.
That's interesting, coming from someone who got a ledger at 14. Did that drive you crazy that you didn't know the exact amount?
Yeah, I'm a little ashamed to say that, but I didn't do the investigative research that I should have until, like I mentioned, I was coming up at the end of my sophomore year. I mean, I knew what the line item amounts were, but for example, I didn't know on the unsubsidized Stafford loans how much interest had accrued during the year. My subsidized, I knew that what I saw on paper was going to be what I saw when I graduated because there's no interest that accrues on that. But for the unsubsidized, I was completely clueless. Not to mention, there are also origination fees that they don't outline on that line item sheet.
Oh, that's interesting. So you had fees just to get the loans, and then as you said, some were subsidized where interest was not accruing, but you also had unsubsidized loans where interest was accruing.
That's correct.
Okay. Yeah. Now, you mentioned that around the end of your sophomore year, you figured out your balance. I want to talk about that, but before we do, let me just take a step back. One of the things you had said in your email to me is that starting at age 18, you started investing in an index fund. Mm-hmm. How in the world, again, this is where, I didn't think this, I didn't even know what an index fund was when I was 18. So what prompted you to do that?
So there was a book called Multiple Streams of Income that was published by a gentleman, I think by the name of Robert Allen, published several years ago. And my mom handed it to me right before I left for school. Don't really remember the reason why, but I remember getting this book with me when I went off to school. And a lot of the strategies that he mentioned in there, I felt like they were a little out of reach for me because I just didn't have my hands on a lot of money to be able to execute some of the things he was recommending. But I distinctly remember flipping to one page and he wrote, if you don't do anything else in the book, do this. Invest in a simple S&P 500 index fund. Put money in it every single month and don't touch it ever. And I thought, okay, well, that's something that I can do. And he also added a note in there that there's zero account minimum if you commit to investing $50 a month in the fund. So I said, okay, I can do that. I know that I can at least pull in and consistently give $50 a month into this fund. So I picked up the phone. I called the mutual fund company that was recommended in the book, and then I immediately started doing contributions of $50 a month into the fund.
Wow. And I'm looking at the book now. I don't think I've read it, although it looks familiar to me. I'll link to it in the show notes so other folks can check it out if they want to. Curious, which mutual fund company did you use?
Sure, it was through Transamerica Investment.
Okay.
And I actually think that they've since upped their account minimum to open up an account, but at that time, it was only $50 a month to get started.
Yeah, a lot of them, and minimums do seem to kind of rise over time, but a lot of them will allow you to open up an account and fund it if you do it with automatic withdrawals each month at a lower amount, if you're doing automatic contributions. So I'm curious, do you know what prompted your mom to give you that book? Is she very focused on investing and that sort of thing?
I think that she recognized my desire to get out of the paycheck to paycheck cycle that my family had been in for so long. And one thing that she figured she could give me was knowledge to help me move out of that cycle. So she had given me books like Multiple Streams of Income, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and other books of that nature that I just kind of gobbled up in the years before college and when I had gotten to school.
What do you think of Rich Dad, Poor Dad?
It was difficult for me to execute some of the strategies in that book. Again, sort of like Multiple Streams of Income, because I wasn't old enough, first of all, to do a lot of the stuff that they had mentioned. And I also didn't have my hands on the funds needed. But all in all, I thought that it was a well-written book. I'm sure that some of the folks who have followed those strategies through the 2007-2011 period had some difficulty in the market. But I personally thought that it was a well-written book.
Yeah, I did too. I don't agree with everything that Kiyosaki kind of preaches about money. But I thought the thing is, even if you don't do real estate, which is his focus, you can apply the principles in that book to anything, even just, investing in an index fund, even though he seems to think that's a slow way to get rich. But, anyway, that's a topic for another podcast, I suppose. But yeah, I think it's probably his best book, and I've read several of his. So, okay. So now I got to ask you then. So you read the book. It said put this money in there and don't ever touch it. Do you still have that mutual fund?
This is probably something that we'll get into a little bit later on. But I actually cashed it out to pay my last student loan right when I graduated.
Okay. Well, that's good. That's a good use.
So
that's a good use of
it.
Well, that's a good use of the money, right? So.
Right. At least I thought so.
Okay. Well, okay. So let's go back. You're at college. You've gone through 2 years, and now you've gotten what you need to log into your accounts and see how much you've borrowed. So, what was the number?
The number was $12,000.
And how did that number hit you?
It was a little difficult to see at first. I had no idea that it had like you said, I had a rough idea how much it was, but I didn't think it had gotten up to the 12K range. And
so when you saw that, what'd you do?
I immediately, so actually let me take a step back for a second. I read Dave Ramsey's book before I did the research to find my loan balance. And one of the things he very, very clearly outlines for his baby step 2 is get an idea of all the debt you have, precisely how much it is. So this was one of my action items, to go in and make sure that I knew exactly how much I owed in student loans.
And you're referring to his book, The Total Money Makeover?
Yep, Total Money Makeover.
Okay.
So I read it cover to cover in a matter of a couple of days and started taking action on it. So as soon as I saw that number, I thought, I got to get rid of this as quickly as possible.
So how'd you do that?
So to offset the $12K in student loans that I had about $5,000 in savings at that time. So between what I had saved when I entered college and what I had saved 2 years after I'd gone into college was not very a big difference. It jumped from $3,000 to $5,000. I had been delivering newspapers for my first 2 years of college, and as you can imagine, it didn't pay very much and also didn't give very many hours. So I had a difficult time edging up my savings during that time.
Okay, but let me just make sure I got this. So you're delivering newspapers while you're attending school full time?
Yeah, I would wake up at 6 a.m. 2 to 3 days a week to deliver newspapers.
And from that income, you saved $2,000.
Yes, I did. Also worked a summer in between, but most of it was the newspaper income.
See, I just think that's phenomenal. Okay, so you read Dave Ramsey's Total Money Makeover. You've got $5,000 in the bank, $12,000 in loans, and you still got 2 more years of college.
Right.
So what's your plan now?
Yeah, so I had an immediate, I've got to stop the bleeding moment, because I knew that if I hadn't done anything, that loan balance was going to double by the time I graduated. I was already signed up to study abroad in the fall of 2010, so I knew that my ability to earn income while I was away was going to be limited. But, I knew that I had to have a solid action plan to pay down this debt when I got back from studying abroad. So it turned out that I had to take out another $3,500 in loans to study abroad. But I made the decision, a very difficult decision at the time, to take off a semester after I'd gotten back from the study abroad program and work. So the income that I earned during that period that I worked from January 2011 to August 2011 put me in positive net worth territory finally.
So, in other words, the income you earned during those 8 months was enough to, added to your $5,000, was enough to pay off your student loans.
Yes, I was putting away about $1,300 to $1,500 a month when I was working.
And feel free to decline to answer this question, but you're putting away, you said between $1,300 and $1,500?
That's correct. Yeah.
On what kind of income?
I was making, I think in the beginning they were paying me about $16 an hour, and then I got a raise to $18 an hour. But the caveat that I should throw in here is that I was living under my brother's roof at the time. Okay. So I was paying nothing by way of rent, and I would also eat meals with he and his family in the evening. So that was a huge help as well.
But even with that, were you working a 40-hour week?
I was working a 40-hour week. That's right.
I mean, I'm just doing the quick math here, but that's about $3,000 maybe before taxes, probably a little less.
Yeah, I was living on very little, and also he worked at the same company, so I carpooled with him to work. I mean, I really had very little by way of expenses.
And so then when you went back, okay, so that covered your I guess by this time you had $15,500 in loans, right? If I'm doing the math right. So you were able to obviously save. I mean, we're talking roughly 50% of your gross income. And through 8 months of work, you saved up enough, along with what you'd already saved, to pay off your loans. But now you're going to go back to school. So how do you deal with the room and board expenses of 2 more years of college?
So I actually didn't make the move to pay off all my loans until right when I graduated. So I kept the money that I saved in a savings account, and I kept the loan money, in the loan account. So I didn't take any immediate action to pay that down.
Did you?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
When I went back to school, I actually had to dip into a little bit of the money that I had saved during that 8-month working period. So that was a tremendous help with helping me pay for my room and board expenses going forward. And I also moved off campus into a studio apartment that I shared with someone. So that significantly reduced the amount of my expenses.
Okay. And did you keep working?
I kept working in a work-study capacity when I finished that long-term internship that I had done. So I was back down to making like the newspaper delivery type wages. And were you still able to save money on those low wages? No, I wasn't. So for that period that I went back to school, that first semester, I was not able to save anything really. But I was okay with that because I was in positive net worth territory, and that just put me at ease. Now, I'm curious, were you actually tracking your net worth during this time? Yeah, I have a net worth spreadsheet, and I tally it up every month so I could see steadily. I wasn't good about it some months here and there, but I was good enough about it to be able to go back and do the research for this interview. Okay. Well, I'm just curious, how many years worth of data do you have? The summer of 2010, when I mentioned that I first looked up my loan balance, I believe that was the first year that I had done a net worth calculation. And it was really simple because I had the investment account that I mentioned and like a savings account and the loan. So it was just the two assets minus the one liability.
Right. And but you still track your net worth today.
I do.
Yeah. I mean, do you find it encouraging as you sort of look back to where you were and see how far you've come?
It's incredibly encouraging. I didn't think that I would reach the kind of numbers where I am today 4 years ago, because we're really talking about 4 years since I've really gotten serious about the get out of debt plan and the building assets plan. So that tracking that I did over all that time, I attribute a lot of my success to just being able to see with full transparency how much progress I was making every month.
Yeah, and it kind of keeps you honest, because if you have a bad month, it's kind of like, for me anyway, when I'm trying to lose weight, it's like if I know I'm not doing a good job, I don't want to get on the scale, right? So it's like with finances, if you know you've had a bad month and now the end of the month has come and you gotta figure out your net worth, it's like painful. But
right.
It forces you to kind of stay on track as best you can.
It does. And you can do course corrections accordingly. So it's good to have that information in front of you.
Right. Yeah, I've tracked our net worth for a long time. And then I did it, I like you, I kind of have had some periods of time where I haven't kept up with it, although I've been pretty good about it the last several years. But I have old net worth statements going back like a decade. And when I look at those, it's really eye-opening. It's like, wow, we've, slowly but surely we're doing okay. It can be very, very motivating.
Yeah, to your point, I can't imagine looking back a decade from now on my net worth statement from 20 years of age, what feeling I'm going to have at that time looking back at the negative net worth I had at age 20.
Yeah, well, I suspect you're gonna look back at it and be very happy with how you've progressed. So
I sure hope so.
One thing you said to me, and I just want to make sure we got this right, that when you realized what your debt was, you read Dave Ramsey's book, you just said, okay, that's it, no more debt, that for I guess your last 3 semesters of school, you did not eat out a single time. Now, is that literally true, or are you just saying you didn't eat out very often?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's not literally true. There were a few times here and there, but I would confidently say about 95 to 98% of my meals were either prepared by me and brought to work or eaten at home.
Right. Okay, so you're working in school. You're good with how you're managing your money. You graduated at the end of 2012?
Yeah, right in December of 2012, I graduated.
And when you did that, you were able to take the money you'd saved at that point and pay off all your student loans.
The last week of classes, I just made a big $20,000 chunk payment on my loans and was done with it forever.
Now, $20,000. Oh, was that because of accrued interest?
That was because of accrued interest and an additional loan that I had taken out. The school had an arrangement where we had to take out loans if we were getting scholarships from the institution.
Really?
So the last loan that I took out, I actually just took the loan and put it in my savings account and then paid it back when I was graduating.
The school, wait a minute. If you get a scholarship, the school mandates that you also go take a loan out.
Right, because their perception is that you don't have the financial need for the scholarship if you're not taking the loan as well.
That is just insanity.
I thought that it was incredibly strange when I first heard that, because I denied the loan, and then I got a call from the financial aid office that says, we're going to strip away your scholarship money if you don't take this loan. So, of course, I immediately scrambled to take the loan, but I just thought it was ridiculous that was one of the stipulations.
See, now the cynic in me starts to think, okay, does the college profit when you take this loan? Do they get some fee? Do they get some origination fee or something? But I've never heard that before. Okay,
and
well,
I hadn't heard of it either before I had encountered that situation, but it's very real.
Did the loan accrue interest while you had it out, or was it interest free while you're in college?
That loan was actually serviced by my university, and they did subsidize the interest on it.
Well, well, that's good.
Yeah. But still, I have a hard time coming up with any rhyme or reason why they would mandate that students take out that type of loan.
Right. Yeah, that's odd. I've not heard that before. But okay, so you graduate, you pay off your school student loans, you have no debt, and you get a job. And then just consistent with basically everything you've told us, you pay cash for your first car. How'd you do that?
So I had some money saved up above and beyond what I had to pay for the student loan. And then I also had a signing bonus from the company that I joined. So I literally took my signing bonus money, went to the used car dealership, got a pretty good deal on a car, and just wrote a check for it and drove it off the lot.
So you bought a used car?
I bought a used car, a 2011 Chevy.
Okay. And can I ask you how much you paid for it?
I paid $10,750 for it.
Now, did it kill you to write that check?
Oh, it absolutely murdered me.
Yeah. I mean, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Interestingly enough, I actually don't include my vehicle as part of my net worth calculation these days. So when I wrote that check, I just saw it as saying goodbye to that money.
And you know what, Natalie, I think that is absolutely the right way to think of it. And I do the exact same thing, because we all know the cars are going to depreciate, and then you're going to get rid of it eventually and have to get a new one.
Exactly.
And you want to, it's painful. Like I paid cash for my last car. It's painful, but sometimes you need to experience that pain to keep you from doing something dumb with your money.
I would completely agree.
Yeah. I'm curious, did the dealership have any reaction to the fact that here comes this young person into their dealership and pays cash, or strokes a check for a car?
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that. It was a very small dealership, but the buzz got around the office very quickly. And actually, a couple of folks, the financing gentleman who worked there and the gentleman who was selling me the car, were both trying to convince me to take out a loan for it. And I had to convince them that just wasn't necessary and wasn't in line with my philosophy. So finally, they took the check and let me drive off with it, and the rest was sort of history. I'm still driving the car to this day. Yeah,
it's funny. I bought my last car, which was a used Toyota in McLean, Virginia, which is not where we live, but it's a very sort of well-to-do area of Northern Virginia. And I walked in with my laptop because I was going to do a wire transfer. And I made the comment that, I was just thinking, this is a very wealthy area. I bet a lot of people pay cash for their car. And I said to him, I bet this happens a lot. That people come in either at the check or they come in with a computer and they do a wire transfer to pay for a car. And he looked at me and goes, "No, you're the first."
Wow.
And I thought, this is just crazy. Anyway, the thing is, too, car dealerships make a fortune if you borrow through them on a car loan. So they'll definitely try to convince you to take out a loan if they can.
Right. Yeah, that part didn't surprise me. Naturally, it's within their best interest to convince consumers to take out a loan. So
you graduated not even 2 years ago yet, year and a half ago.
Not even year and a half. Yes.
So what have you done since then in terms of I think you've bought a condo, yes?
I did. So when I first started the job, and that was like March 4th, 2013, I was still living in a shared studio apartment. So compared to my income, I was paying very little in rent. And I was also traveling, as I mentioned earlier, so my transportation and meals were paid for by my company. So I really didn't have much by way of expenses, and I was able to go into overdrive and save a tremendous amount of money during 2013, enough to the point where I had 10% to put down on an apartment in D.C. And fortunately, they're trying to do quite a bit more lending for apartments in D.C., so I was able to get a conventional loan with just 10% down.
Oh, great. Now, did you have to pay private mortgage insurance?
I do not have to pay PMI, but the interest rate was a little higher than I would have liked.
Yeah. That's fabulous. Now, are you investing?
I actually just started contributing to my company's 401k plan last month, because after the condo purchase, my next goal was to build up 6 months of cash reserves. So I just hit that goal a couple months ago, and then immediately signed up for my company's 401k plan.
And how are you? Can you just give us a sense as to how you're investing the money? In other words, what kind of mutual funds?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, I'm doing a 10% contribution right now from my gross income, and I just wanted everything directed into an S&P index fund. I'm in talks with a financial planner right now to get some more advice about how I can invest the money to align with my retirement goals. But just as an immediate action to get started, I did fully 100% in the S&P.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to get started. My sister had sort of a similar situation a couple of years ago, and she was asking me what to do. And I said, if you're just starting out, just put it in S&P 500. She was in her 20s then, and it's well diversified. You're young enough that you can work towards maybe a more diversified portfolio with bonds or international funds, maybe some REITs at some point. But when you're just starting out, contributing money, you're starting with relatively small amounts of money, and it's just a simple and easy way to get started. Does your company match any of your contributions?
They do. So I actually was invested in the 401k program until I hit 1 year with the company, and that was March 2014 when I hit that. So I'm eligible for a 6% match, but they don't kick it in paycheck to paycheck. They kick it in at the very end of the year.
Okay. All right. Well, it sounds like you're doing fantastic. So, as you look back, what mistakes have you made? I as I hear your story, I can't find too many. So, do you look back and think, I wish I had done this totally different?
To be completely honest, I think there's such thing as being a little too much of a tightwad with your money. And I do believe that I missed out on some experiences in college because of the fact that I was taking every opportunity to work during breaks and during summers. So I didn't get to enjoy a lot of those activities that some of my peers did. While, yes, they do have student loans to pay back for the most part, I think that I could have found a little bit of a trade-off between working and freeing up some money to be able to travel and do other things. And I think that even impacts me to this day because working for about a year and a half now, I haven't taken a single vacation. And I think that I still have that hustle mentality that I had during my undergrad years. So it's been a little difficult moving away from that.
Is that something it sounds like it's something that you want to try to be able to do?
Yes, absolutely. I think it just takes some baby steps. So what I'm hoping that I can do once I start meeting with a financial planner is that they can tell me, okay, Natalie, if you save this percentage of your income, you'll have this much left over for fun money in a month. I just need someone to tell me that it's okay to spend a little on items that aren't necessarily necessities so that I can enjoy some of the income that I'm making. Right.
Well, and sometimes it is helpful to get a sort of a disinterested third party's view of anything, but in this case, finances. It can give you a perspective that maybe it's hard to achieve or reach on your own.
Right, and that's exactly what I'm hoping to get, just an unbiased point of view on things.
Right. Well, that's fabulous. You mentioned a number of books that you've read. Any others that you liked, whether it's personal finance or investing or?
So, Millionaire Next Door is a book that I really enjoyed, and I think I read that my second year in college. Richest Man in Babylon, which I'm sure you've read, is another one that I really enjoyed. And actually, one of my favorite books that I read, I think, during my sophomore year was a book called, it's not very well known, it's called $1 Million by 30. And it was written by someone who had graduated from, I think, UGA, moved up to New York, lived in housing projects in New York while making $40,000 a year. And he does a full description of how from the age of 22 to the age of 30 he was able to become a millionaire in New York City.
I'll link to all of these in the show notes. I'm looking. I've read The Millionaire Next Door and Richest Man in Babylon. I've not heard of $1 Million by 30, and I'm looking at it now on Amazon. And I love the sort of subtitle: How to Overcome a Crap Job, Stingy Parents, and a Useless Degree to Become a Millionaire Before or After Turning 30. Yeah, although I'm not sure.
That was exactly what pulled me in, that tagline that he put on there.
I'm not sure what I think about stingy parents. But other than that, I think, that looks interesting. Okay. Well, I will link to those in the show notes. And, I appreciate your time today and sharing your story, particularly as it relates to getting through college without any loans. Now, certainly you had obviously tremendous help with scholarships, but even so, you could have easily come out of school with $30,000 or $40,000 in loans just for room and board, and you didn't. And what you did have, you were able to pay off in full. And I just think that's such an important story for people to hear, because right now, I think what so much of the the press is preaching is all these helpless, hopeless college students who just can't help but get a liberal arts degree and $200,000 in debt. And I think we need more people out there and examples like you saying, no, that's not your only choice. You're not a victim here. You can stand up and make some decisions on your own and improve your situation and get through college without a boatload of loans. But maybe that's just that's just my perspective. It sounds like something that you were obviously able to do and do very well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I by no means think that my story is unique. As I mentioned earlier, I knew several other people that I went to school with that had the same scholarship that I had. But because different choices were made, like you mentioned, they graduated with $30,000 or $40,000 in debt, as opposed to being able to wipe off that debt as soon as they graduated. And it's funny. I was listening to a program on NPR recently where they were honing in on the difference between the sticker price and the net price of college. While it's true that on paper college looks to be very expensive, and for many people it really is, what you see in those publications about how much X university costs per year is usually not what your average student is paying. So there are ways to work with the financial aid office to make sure college can be affordable for you.
Good. Okay. Now, the friends that you mentioned or acquaintances that had the same scholarships that you did that still graduated with a lot of debt, are you in contact with any of them now?
Yes, I am.
So do you guys talk about this? Like, do they say, man, I wish I'd have done what you did. These student loans are awful. You mentioned you had some regrets about maybe having more fun in college, but do they have regrets about how they handled the money?
So it's a very delicate topic, my personal financial situation, especially when I talk to friends, because I even sometimes have to hide the fact that I'm a homeowner, because when people find out, I'm sort of treated a little differently. And I think some of my friends are a little bit in awe of what I've been able to accomplish, but I don't want that to be a differentiator between myself and them. And I think that some of my friends who do know about the car situation and the apartment situation, quite frankly, think that I had extreme amounts of parental help and didn't work as hard as I did. So I typically stay away from that topic, but I do often hear my friends talk about shelling out $300 to $400 or even more for student loans per month and how they feel so poor. And I just can't relate to those topics. So I typically just play a listening role when I hear those discussions come up and try to avoid those discussions as much as possible.
Yeah, well, I can certainly understand that. Okay, well, Natalie, again, thank you so much for your time. Anything else you want to share with us before we bring this podcast to a close? Anything else you think folks could benefit from? Any other experiences that maybe we haven't touched upon?
I would just simply reiterate the fact that I don't think that my story is unique. While I was eligible for hefty scholarships in school, again, there are lots of merit scholarships that students can write essays for and get funding for when they go into school. There are ways to minimize your debt load or completely eliminate it, and it's a shared burden of both the student and the parent. I think that students should take it upon themselves to work in college and be able to have some skin in the game when it comes to funding their education. And also parental support is very critical. So working together as a team can really make this a possibility. Right.
And the other thing, I guess, as you say all that is, too, the college that you choose is important. Because they vary in price significantly.
They do. And I was fortunate enough to go to a private institution that had pretty generous scholarships. But had that not been an option, I actually probably would have gone to community college for 2 years and then transferred to a state school, because there's still incredible value in following that method.
Yeah, there really is. And it's a lot less expensive.
Exactly right.
Great. Well, okay. Well, Natalie, again, thank you so much for taking the time to share your story. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Rob.
Well, there you have it. None of this is complicated. It's work hard, save as much money as possible, make the sacrifices that you need to make the sacrifices that others are not willing to make, and you end up graduating from school debt-free. You end up paying cash for a car. You end up buying a condo. Just a couple of years after graduating from college. Now, I suspect some people listening to this interview will say, yeah, it's not really fair because she had scholarships. Although you also heard her say if she hadn't gotten those, she'd have gone to a less expensive school. And, that would have been the choice that she would have made. And, for those that have to pay for school, it may not make sense to spend $55,000 a year in tuition. That just may not be a smart move to make. I know these decisions are difficult for any of us, let alone someone who's 18, just out of high school. Hopefully, you may have a parent or parents that are helping you make these decisions. I don't suggest and pretend that they're easy, but these are the kinds of decisions that we should be making. We don't want to get through college, $150,000 in debt and then start asking, gee, how am I going to pay for this? No, you got to ask those questions before you go into debt. And so yes, Natalie did have some scholarships. A lot of people have varying degrees of financial aid, and certainly that is a factor in how much you may need to borrow. Hopefully not much at all. It may also be a factor in terms of where you end up going to school. But I think the real story here is you can go to school and not get into a ton of debt. It may require some sacrifices. You may have to choose a different school. You may have to work in college, but those are choices that can be made. I found Natalie's story to be very inspirational, and I hope you did too. If you have any questions for Natalie, feel free to shoot me an email. I'm happy to forward the emails to her. And as always, you can email me about anything, dr@DoughRoller.net. Would love to hear from you. Hey, until next time, remember, the best thing money can buy is financial freedom.